This course on the theology of the body that we're doing is meant for those who are already married to get more out of the great gift that God has given them, to couples preparing for marriage so that they might fulfill what God asks of them, to consecrated religious and to priests who are called to live the nuptial meaning of the body fully in their lives, and for all of us, so that we might understand better who it is to be a man, who it is to be a woman, called to love as Christ himself loves. Let's get right into what Pope John Paul II said Christ did when he was asked about the meaning of marriage. We read in St. Matthew's Gospel, chapter 19, that some Pharisees came to Jesus, and to test him they asked, "Is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife for any reason whatever?" They answered, "Have you not read that the one who made them at the beginning made them male and female, and said, 'For this reason a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh.' So they are no longer two, but one flesh. Therefore, what God has joined together, let no one separate." They said to him, "Why then did Moses give us command us to give a certificate of dismissal and to divorce her?" Jesus said to them, "It was because you were so hard-hearted that Moses allowed you to divorce your wives. But from the beginning it was not so. And so I say to you, whoever divorces his wife except for unchastity and marries another commits adultery." We see exactly what Christ did when he was asked a question about marriage, especially about marriage's indissolubility. He took marriage right back to the way God made marriage from the beginning, that man and woman were supposed to be a gift of themselves to each other. They were supposed to become one flesh, and that no one was supposed to be able to divide what God had joined. The only reason divorce was in the world was because man's heart had become hardened over the course of time, that it had lost what God had originally given it, which would have made that marriage seen by man and woman as something that could never be put asunder. Let's follow Pope John Paul II's thought. In taking marriage back to the beginning, Christ showed us where we need to go. And when Pope John Paul II started to analyze what Christ revealed about the beginning, he said that a few things were obvious. The first and most important thing for the foundation was that God had created man in solitude. There was an original solitude. That original solitude was meant to teach man two things. First, that he was different from all the creatures that God gave Adam the ability to name in freedom. That there was no helper fit for Adam among all the creation. Second, was that Adam was also different than God. That in the origins, man was meant to realize his need for another person. That he was incomplete in and of himself. That he needed to have someone, some other person, on the basis of which he could relate as a person. We'll discuss why in a second. It had something to do with the meaning of who the human person is as a gift. He was meant to be able to give himself to somebody else, but there was no one else that he could truly, in a way, in accord with his nature, he could give himself to. So that first and original insight man was supposed to realize, and Adam did, was that it was not good for him to be alone. That he was made to give of himself to another, but creatures would be an unworthy recipient, and God was too above a recipient. Where do we go from there? That leads to what God himself did. God, after having done all of creation, and after each day pronouncing it good and good and good, and after the creation of man and woman having pronounced it very good, finally said, "It is not good." It was not good for man to be alone. Even though Adam had God all to himself in the garden, even though he was perfectly created in the state of grace, he was lonely. He needed to have a proper and fitting helper to allow him to become who God created him to be by receiving his gift of self and being able to give self back. So God allowed Adam to fall asleep. It's almost a new creation. And out of that sleep, God formed Eve from Adam's side. Why from the side? To symbolize their equality before God, because they stand side by side in front of God. As I say some of the times when I teach about the theology of the body, God didn't choose to create Eve from Adam's big toenail or from his armpit or from something that would obviously show some discordance or inequality between Adam and Eve. In creating Eve from Adam's side, they were flesh of the same flesh, bone of the same bone. They were meant to stand as equals before God. And Eve was a fitting helper for Adam. Adam was finally able to rejoice in his humanity. This is bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. He was able finally to learn how to love another person. And in loving that other person, learn how to relate and love God in the created world that God had made for Adam and Eve. And then in that analogy of human love, also learn how to love God. So that original solitude of Adam, of the human person without a fitting helper, was meant to lead to an original unity, this desire to give of himself in love to another person. And that original unity was expressed in a particular way through the human body. That's the third of the original experiences that Pope John Paul II describes. First, the original solitude, which leads to the original unity, and the original unity leads to the meaning of original nakedness. When we look in the book of Genesis, it says something very interesting, that Adam and Eve were perfectly naked with each other, but unashamed. That when they looked at the other person's body, they saw that body as a sign of the other person, almost as a first type of sacrament in the broadest way of looking at a sacrament as an external sign of an interior reality. When they looked at the naked body of each other, they saw a sign of who that person was, and part of that personality contained within that body. What was that personality when you got down to its real core? That personality showed a nuptial meaning, a meaning that was meant to be spousal, to give of oneself to another in the flesh and in the person. That when Adam looked at Eve, he saw the gift of somebody, a neon sign crying out saying, "I am a gift for you." And also an invitation, a summons for Adam to give of himself in love over to Eve. And when Eve looked at Adam, she saw the same two realities. This gift coming toward her and this summons to give of herself in response. That original nakedness showed that they had a tremendous trust for each other, that they could be free to give themselves over to the other because they knew that the other was going to receive and welcome that incredible gift. And in so doing between each other, they learned something about how they should relate to God in love. That in love of God, they were to receive God's gift of all creation, God's gift of each other, God's gift of everything, and respond to that great gift in creation with the gift of themselves back to God. This nuptial meaning of the human person based on the nuptial significance of the body was meant to lead to a communion of persons in love. Pope John Paul II said that the deepest theological insight you can say about man and woman, and the deepest insight of the theology of the body as a whole, is that man and woman are made in the image and likeness of God. And God is just not a mind who's rational or a being with a will who's free. And man and woman were created with that rational aspect to him and that ability to choose freely. But the deepest thing of all was that man and woman were created together in the image of God as a communion of persons in love. We'll talk more about that when we return in a minute.